I had to make a few stops, and I just hate it when people be doing other things other than giving the people the information that they came to give. You know, doing all kinds of stuff. So anyway, as I said in my other live, my mom was a minister and my dad was not. You have my mom's side of the family who they are primarily comprised of, now what's done happened over here? I'm sorry, y'all. What has done happened? Oh, is that his tire messed up. So anyway, so you have my mom's side of the family who are very faith-based people, and then my dad's side will knock if you book. Let's just cut to the chase. They will knock if you book. Okay, so when they divorced, of course, quite naturally, you know, I would go with my dad on the weekends, or actually whenever I wanted to, because when you get to a certain age when you can just pick up the phone and call. I picked up the phone and I called and I went, because I mean, I was of age to call and ask him. And he worked long hours at Bynum, or Anderson Army Depot, for those who don't know. So, you know, when he could, he could. But I can't really complain, honestly, about having a childhood because it makes you a well-rounded person. When you have one parent that is one thing, and then another parent that is something different. I'm thankful for both sides of my family, both of them. But this particular story is about my uncle on my dad's side. So when I would go to visit my dad, my grandmother always used to live in like close proximity. So this particular story took place when my dad and my grandmother were both living in East Gaston on James Street. So back in the 90s, they used to have this LGBTQ club called the Nitro. I can't believe I'm telling y'all this, but this I was always a curious individual. Okay, so I would go over to my dad's house, and my uncle is who used to like do my hair and stuff. Now, my uncle is a proud member. I didn't know back then because I was probably young enough to still be getting ponytails. So 8, 9, something like that. But old enough to be curious about what was going on. So I would go over to my grandmother, my dad's house, and then I would, of course, walk back and forth from my dad to my grandmother's house. I mean, that was in the early 90s, so you know, that was back in the day when people was leaving their front doors open all night and things like that. I wouldn't recommend that you do that now. So I went down, my uncle would do my hair or whatever, and I noticed that he had like this Diana Ross wig. He had one of those mirrors that was like I guess you would call it a trifold mirror. That was like 3 sections. So I used to notice that he had this wig up on the mirror, right? So I would go down there. He had a chair, you know, that you would sit in. Because when you walk into my grandmother's house, his room was the first room to your right. Easy access out the front door. Especially for somebody like me who was nosy. Still is nosy. But I admit that I'm nosy. A lot of people don't admit that they nosy. I'm nosy, and I'll tell you I'm nosy. So, but I also don't mind giving you my own tea. So, I go down to to my grandmother's house, and my uncle would do my hair when I visited my dad. So one night, I would notice that, you know, he would go out at night. I mean, always full. You know, grandmama's house always full of people. But he consistently lived with my grandmother. So anyway, I would go down and I would notice that the wig would be gone. So I'm thinking, one day I hatched the plan, right? That I was going to follow him because he would leave on foot, but then sometimes he would have friends or whatever come and pick him up. So one night he left, right? I was pretending to be asleep on the couch. My grandmama had this little bitty black and white TV that sat on like this, I guess what you would call it wouldn't necessarily be a curio because they didn't have doors, shelving, let's say shelving, for lack of a better word, because I have no idea what to call it. But anyway, so I pretended to be asleep, right, until he got out of the door, you know, far enough to where I know that if I opened up that door, he would know that I was creeping out behind him. So, honey, I waited for him to get up the road a little bit, and I teeter-tottered out the house right behind him. Now, like I said, he had an old, nasty piece of Diana Ross, honey. So it was no way I was gonna miss it. So, my first experience with the LGBTQIA community was I snuck in the nitro, running in behind my uncle. And still to this day, he has no idea that I did this. But I went in, they had these green lights just flashing. You know, I was so amazed. So I have to give a special shout out to my uncle, because if it wasn't for him, I had never been exposed to front row seat LGBTQIA, never in my life. Before they added the I to A and all of that, before I ever knew what LGBTQ was, my uncle, I just used to notice, you know, that I was drawn to him for some reason. So now, fast forward in adulthood, I can appreciate the things that they have given to the culture. It's a lot of things people don't know. That isms, the way people speak, hand gestures and things like that. You just don't know how much of that was pulled from ballroom scene and LGBTQIA. One thing I can say though, tying this back into my mom and my dad, I never heard my dad or my mom say anything bad, negative about my uncle. Never, ever. Not one time. Not once have I heard. And my dad is a pretty outspoken man. He got me beat. But I have never heard either one of them say anything bad about him. And you know, with her being a minister or whatever, you would think, but you know, because there's some people who feel like their opinions need to be heard every time they encounter someone or something that they disagree with, and that is not so. I'm a firm believer in, if it don't affect me, it ain't none of my business. Let me say that again for the people in the back. If it don't affect me, it's none of my business. So if it's somebody else's life choice, that's their business. Let them folks live how they want to live. That's their business. So yeah, my first experience with the LGBTQ community was sneaking in the nitro back in the early 90s, honey. Those who are from Gaston and remember the nitro back in the early 90s, your girl snuck up in there, honey. I snuck in. I got a little bit, snuck right on back out. I don't know how they didn't. Probably because I was so small. But I sure snuck up in there. It's no longer, the building is no longer standing now, but if you've been in Gaston long enough to remember the nitro, yeah, your girl stuck them in there. Well, y'all have a good rainy Wednesday.